Morning. As Les said, my name's Emily Taylor and I am an analyst with Step Change and Safety. When Les first asked me to do this review with Apito, I kind of asked myself, what was my personal opinion of MIST? What did I know about it? And all I really knew was based on what others had told me. I grew up in Buckie, and my colleagues, my peers, my friends were quite frequent in offshore trips and knew all about MIST, and so I had quite a negative view of MIST. And the theme, death by PowerPoint, came up quite a lot. And so, going into this research, I tried to keep it as open as I possibly could. However, I couldn't help but think that this was more or less the opinion of MIST from an offshore point of view. Now, as Les said, Step Change are committed to MIST and its principles, and with this kind of significant unease and the kind of effectiveness of MIST with its perceived value, we committed the review with Apito, who have had the standard in place for 4 years now. And I took the lead in the classroom-based analysis, whereby myself, along with Gillian Clark of Apito, visited 3 separate training providers and sampled 100 different classroom assessments, which involved their feedback and their assessments. That gave us a database of about 3,500 individual papers and feedback forms and opinions. So it was quite a big range of information we had access to. And as I said, it was mainly negative, to be honest, that we thought, that people thought about. And so we went to the end user at an organisational level. We wanted to find out what organisations felt about MIST, and an electronic questionnaire revealed actually there was quite a positive opinion of MIST and what it is. There was some negative, people seeing it as a tick box exercise, some people simply seeing it as patronising. And there was a lot of identification between the similarities between MIST and Bosiet, which Martin mentioned at the core of the onion of what we see as what should be competency across the industry as a minimum standard. Now, as a business analyst for Step Change and Safety, I didn't see myself as having a particular need for a course in manual handling, for example, which is one of the modules in MIST. But having sat the course, it's one of the main things I remember taking away from, because we physically did the exercise, we went out, the trainer was really engaging, really enthusiastic, and he spoke the whole class through how to best practice manual handling. And I found that that was one of the key things that I remembered, as opposed to the 9 modules. Manual handling was the one that came back for me because of the trainer. And that was again echoed by what the feedback in the classroom said. The key message was that a good trainer was critical to a positive experience of MIST. It should be noted that there should be a little bit of white coat syndrome here, because everybody who filled out the feedback forms did so in the presence of the trainer, and so it had to be nice. But overall, it was very positive. There were a couple of things about the videos and the content needing updating, which is to be expected following the 4-year review. I don't know if any of you have done MIST yourself, but Skeleton Sid is a firm favourite. So this opinion, the good overview, the good standard, was kind of making me think, well, maybe the death by PowerPoint idea that I kind of thought was what MIST was wrong, but I was wrong. The feedback quite clearly showed that the opinion is that it can be death by PowerPoint, and you're being spoken to, you're being preached to, and it was quite difficult to engage. The value of the content was being lost because you're essentially being preached at and spoken through a course which was seen as a bit dull and a bit irrelevant and a bit boring. And the content, the physical questions, the assessments after every single module caused a bit of difficulty as well, with the questions themselves not being particularly clear. This particular question, I found, had quite a lot of scribbled out answers. And for me, as an analyst, it was difficult to gauge whether that was a natural error, whether they were cheating, or whether they just didn't know the answer because the question wasn't worded properly. Standing in front of industry experts as I am, out of interest, who was responsible for ensuring that procedures are being followed? A show of hands for your employer. 1 or 2. And for the HSE? A third party? And what about yourself? So I didn't know the answer either. So I went back to the booklet which training provider offered us. And the answer I got was your employer is responsible for ensuring that a third party, such as the HSE, regulates the procedure to being followed by individuals. What does that mean? I still didn't know the answer, but to get this answer correct in this particular assessment, you had to say the HSE. Now, that's not right. Everybody interprets the information differently, but this particular training provider said that you were only competent if you know that the HSE regulate procedures. Now, as I said, it was quite difficult to establish whether there had been cheating in these assessments or whether it was natural errors, because on all three providers, every single assessment was marked by each other delegates. They all swapped the papers around and marked it that way. When I did my MIST, I scribbled out an answer and ticked the correct box because I couldn't bear to have anything less than 100%. And you need to ask yourself, is that a good assessment of what is competency in the MIST course? So there's a big issue around how the questions are phrased and how the language is used. So in terms of the raw data, this is a breakdown of all 9 modules when I found about who got things right, who got things wrong in every single module. It's worthwhile stating that although there is a little dark red failure column, nobody failed. In the 3,500 papers that I looked at, not a single person failed. This dark red failure represents a verbal assessment whereby people got more than 3 questions wrong out of 5 and had to be verbally spoken through the assessments. And as a result, the trainer was satisfied that they had the knowledge and passed them. What was quite worrying is that on all the modules, it was quite common to get 2 incorrect answers out of 5, which out of 5 doesn't seem like that much. Modules 2 and 7 had 10 questions, which could account for the higher level of incorrect answers being more risk. But in terms of failing the modules 4, 7, 8 and 9 had the highest percentage of failures, which Harry will go on to analyse into his data, but park that thought for now. And it should be mentioned that an element of human factors could be referred to here because modules 4 and module 7 on both days were done just after lunch. And so that lethargic, lapse of concentration kind of set in whereby people kind of thought, oh, it's fine, we know it all. In terms of the questions themselves, as I mentioned, there's difficulty in the language, a huge language barrier. And being a human factors and competency event, it would seem silly not to reference that. Typically, people doing the MIST classroom would be brand new to the industry, would be coming from the military or just wanting a way into the industry, which generally have no prior knowledge or no, I suppose, general awareness of the types of language used. For example, I had little to no knowledge of hazardous substances or the permit to work system. And yet when I sat down in the assessments, I was expected to be able to answer questions on them. And so that could account for the incorrect answers here. The lack of clarity and lack of, I suppose, readability of the questions made it difficult for people, particularly foreigners as well, to understand what was being asked of them. So, in sum, really, what I found from the classroom-based was that there was quite a lot of positive opinions. Although I wouldn't exactly say an exam was great, people thought the assessments were worthwhile to gauge knowledge transfer. They saw the classroom as a great overview of health and safety, and that the trainers in particular were particularly engaging, enthusiastic, and kind of took away from the content and focused more on the delivery. The not so positive was that it was death by PowerPoint, and that there was a lot of repetition from the Bosiet course, which typically is done just before the MIST course in the classroom. Some people found it quite irrelevant and patronising. As a business analyst, I could see that point of view because, as I mentioned, I didn't need to know anything about manual handling, but when I sat in the course and did that particular assessment, thinking to myself, when am I ever going to need this? I can put myself in the position of, for example, caterers learning about permit to work or something like that, and I could understand the irrelevance of some of the topics. There were some suggestions from the feedback from the classrooms that the videos needed updating and the content needed updating, which is part of the overall review. And quite interesting, quite a lot of people called for some sort of textbook, like a dummy's guide to MIST, everything you could possibly need to know and could then reference back on in the future going forward. In terms of the classroom as an overview, it was generally quite a positive experience. But I'll pass you on to Harry now, who's going to delve a bit more into the statistics.